Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and welcome to the DGAP morning briefing on geopolitical challenges. I'm Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik quarterly. Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine enters its 652nd day, 652. Intense fighting continues at various points along the front line in eastern and southern Ukraine. Also, Russia continues its air attacks aimed at civilian infrastructure, with 84 Iranian-made kamikaze Shahed drones being used during the night Wednesday, of which 41 were shot down, according to the Ukrainian air forces. President Volodymyr Zelensky delivered a defiant, self-recorded address while walking in downtown Kyiv on the way to pay his respects to the fallen on Ukraine's Armed Forces Day. That was on Wednesday. Meanwhile, his chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, and Defense Minister Rustem Umerov were in Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress to unlock $60 billion worth of military aid. Europe's future financial aid to Ukraine has also become a contentious issue ahead of the European Council meeting on December 14th to 15th, which will be the focus of next week's morning briefing. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Ola Stefanishina has described it as an existential moment for her country. This morning, we want to look at three countries which have seen political change in recent. We'll discuss how these changes are reshaping the EU's agenda, particularly the decisions on the table at the next week's summit, further financial support for Ukraine and the opening of membership talks with Ukraine, as well as the review of the EU's multi-annual budget. I was just about to introduce Tomasz Bielecki. He's a Brussels correspondent for Gazeta Wyborcza and the Polish section of Deutsche Welle. Tomasz will explain to us what to expect from the incoming government of Donald Tusk, hiring Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski, and its impact on the European political landscape. Welcome, Tomasz. And last but not least with us is Milan, who regular viewers of the DGAP morning briefing know very well. Milan is Senior Fellow in the Center for Order and Governance at Eastern Europe, Russia and Central Asia at the German Council on Foreign Relations and instrumental in launching these morning briefings. He will be speaking about the Fico government, which has taken power in Bratislava recently, and also how this affects the calculus of Hungary's Viktor Orban. Second-guessing our favorite illiberal Democrat from Budapest is once more the EU spectator sport number one. Welcome, Milan.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thanks to Jan Stöckmann from the Director's Office, who is supporting the series going forward, as well to our colleagues in the events and communication teams. Let's start with Carolyn.
So the government formation in the Netherlands after the victory or relative victory of Geert Wilders on the 22nd of November is in a flou, as the French would say. Nobody knows where it's going. Wilders got 23% of the vote, which made his party, the Freedom Party, the biggest party, the largest. But the rest is even smaller. But still, over 80% of people, 87% of people, 77% of people haven't voted for him. It is probably, so what Wilders has done, because he was the largest, he sent a scout into the field. It was up to him to take the first initiative to form a government. And this scout has already asked for extra time, largely because it seems to be more or less clear that the majority of the voters want some kind of a right-wing government. But the two center-right parties who are crucial for this, Mark Rutte, so Prime Minister Rutte's liberal, right-wing liberal VVD, and a new sort of split-off of the Christian Democratic Party, which still exists as well, Peter Omtzigt, they are having second thoughts. The VVD has lost so big that it says it will not enter into the government. It needs to eat humble pie, but it could support the government from the opposition benches. And Omtzigt has second thoughts because parts of the program of Geert Wilders, after all, are totally unconstitutional. The only party that seems eager to jump into a government with Geert Wilders' PVV is the famous, or unfamous for some, Farmers' Party, the BBB, which made huge inroads in the Senate elections half a year ago. It became the largest, in fact, representing angry farmers mainly, and is now sort of, like a bit like a deflated balloon with just 8 seats out of 150. So Wilders cannot. So it seems it's very difficult to predict what will happen. What the consequence of this will be for, which is of course what interests us all, for on the European level. What does this election result mean for the Dutch input there, or maybe the lack of it? I think it's always been clear that the current government, which is now the caretaker government, has been the most constructive. I'm not talking about pro or against EU, because the EU exists, but what matters is how you play your games in Brussels. And the current government is probably the most constructive we've had in a decade or even more. And I think also it's safe to predict that these days are more or less over. I think the shadow of Wilders is there, and whatever government we will have, some of the center-right-wing parties who Geert Wilders would like to govern with, they don't support his Nexit proposals, which are in his program, but they all agree we can do a bit less. We can do with a bit less Europe. And in particular, Mr. Omtzigt is very, very critical of Eurozone policies. So I would not be surprised that whatever kind of government we will get in the Netherlands, the line will be, the role of the Netherlands will be the role that it has played on and off for decades, since the 1950s. Be inside and water it down from the inside. Yeah, unfortunately. One more thing, if I may. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What strikes me in this story is that some people are talking about a wave of the far right or extreme right. I think Wilders is quite extreme in some things. He wants to close, he wants to forbid the Quran. He wants to close religious schools. He wants to close mosques, that kind of thing. But I don't see really a wave. What has happened in the Netherlands is a lesson, I think, for other European countries. I think the wave is not the far right coming up. The wave is the center right opening the door to the far right so that it can come in. And this is what's happened in the Netherlands. It's what we have seen in Austria before. It's what we have seen in the UK. The VVD, which had kept the door firmly closed for 10 years, Mark Rutte, as a prime minister, he was always polite to Wilders, but he always told the voters, look, there's something to the right of me, of my party, but you don't want to go there. So the wall was very high. So a vote for Wilders was a lost vote. The guy would not come into government anyway. Now, because Rutte is leaving, his successor has opened the door. Suddenly, the vote for the PVV is not a lost vote anymore. There were people who were afraid that Frans Timmermans, the leader of the left bloc, would become too large. So they voted for Wilders to keep the left out of the government. And to, as a strategic vote, suddenly the PVV was a party like any other party. The VVD lost big, and Wilders won big, relatively big. And I think what you see now on a European level, with the conservatives, the center-right, moving further to the right, with voting down parts of the Green Deal, with talking about migration all the time, which is the issue that the far right does best, is actually not a very good recipe. Let me leave it there.
Thank you very much. That's a very important point you made there at the end. I'm sure we will discuss this on the panel. Let's move on to Tomasz, please, for his initial input.
Well, that change will be seen next week. After a few weeks of delay, finally, the next week, the new government led by Donald Tusk should be sworn in. So he will be elected by the parliament on Monday, his government as a whole with the minister on Tuesday, and on Wednesday next week, he should be sworn in by the president Duda. So one has to admit that despite of fears of some opposition politicians and some, a part of commentariat, the transition of the power is going according to the constitution. So there were some fears that the Kaczynski's party would try to undermine the election results if it loses. No, it's all is going okay, and according to the deadlines by the constitution, government will be formed by forces which got more or less 54% of votes in October elections. He has a clear majority in the lower house of the Polish parliament, but still the main obstacle from the legislative point of view, it is a lack of the majority of 60% of MPs, which is needed to overcome the President Duda veto. In the Polish system, the Polish constitution, the president is allowed to raise his veto and apply it to every legislation apart from the budgetary law. And Tusk government will not have this majority. So the big question for another almost 2 years, because the Duda's terms ends in 2025, is how Duda would behave, and whether he will go for the sabotaging the Tusk's government legislation, whether he will be more reactive, or I would bet that he will be somewhere in the middle. But still, it goes to the relations of Poland and the new government with the EU institutions, with what we call Brussels. Obviously, the main issue, the hottest one politically, and also one of the promises of Tusk in the electoral campaign, was the unfreezing his infamous frozen funds, recovery and resilience funds, which were blocked by Brussels, by the European Commission and the Council, because they are linked to the some rule of law conditions. These conditions are quite narrow, the conditions related to the funds, but yet in the European Commission assessment was there a year ago, and later on, Poland needs some legislative changes to address this, to fulfill these conditions. And in fact, if the Commission sticks to this reading of the need of legislative changes regarding the Polish judiciary, it would obviously make a problem for the Tusk government, because he would need Duda cooperation to pass this legislation. without president's veto. So the start is not so easy as it comes to this very basic and I said the hottest issue in the Poland EU institutions relations. It comes to the EU policy as a whole in the broader sense, apart from the funds, obviously, I think that everyone expects that the huge change from Tusk as compared to Morawiecki government, the Poland would be more constructive and so on, but still, I think we should expect the Tusk be at the same time assertive leader. He will be the prime minister of the government of four forces. I'm simplifying now a little bit, but he will dominate the EU policy, I expect. And one cannot expect as a pro-European leader the sign of the change to be very easy on everything what the EU or Brussels proposes. I think that Poland in recent 2 or 3 weeks was the only EU member states in which the EU reform, treaty changes and so on made to the front pages. There was a resolution adopted by the European Parliament. It was a huge theme in Polish mass media because apparently the Kaczyński's party they posed this for that one of recording. So as a driver for the European Parliament campaign. But okay, the treaty change is not so plausible scenario. But all these ideas of abandoning the unanimity in foreign policy, which is promoted by Chancellor Scholz and so on. Tusk was and is and continues to be. I think he will continue to be against all this change. He also, as a leader, as the president of the European Council, was a huge defender of the unanimity in the areas in which the EU still has this rule, and he will not be able to go for this reform. But it's the kind of the symbol because it's EU reform, institutions reform is not something which will be decided or discussed in forthcoming months, but still it is a symbol of assertiveness of those. Same for the Green Deal. The Green Deal and green transition in energy and so on. It is a policy which is needed, extremely costly for the Polish economy, and every Polish government, either left, right, center, Tusk, Morawiecki, and so on. The difference is this sovereignist rhetoric. Which was used by Morawiecki, but also Tusk. I think he will be, his government, his minister will not be the very easy negotiators of new rules and new demands of this policy. And be speaking, they would negotiate, to have more and more support from the EU side in that area. Accession to the Eurozone, it will not be the priority of this government. Migration, yes, it's just one of these iconic hot issues of EU policy. Yes, Tusk was as a prime minister in the past, and then as a president of the European Council was he opposed the decisions made by majority, not unanimity. So there is the ongoing reform in the EU on so-called migration pact, which is to be decided by the majority vote in the council by ministers. Okay, it is. If it is adopted finally by Brussels, it will be followed by the Polish government. Without enthusiasm, but still Tusk's opinions and line on migration quite useful and will be quite
I think we have to leave it there at the moment and get Milan in.
Thank you. I apologize for having a strong cold, but hopefully you will understand me. All that we are discussing, it might be nitty-gritty details from domestic politics of 3 member states, but I think the overall story, the bottom line here is that at the EU level, we see an increasingly divergent union with a lot of domestic political issues hanging over the heads of the leaders. And I think it builds or it plays into the hands of Viktor Orban as a veteran of the European Council to increase confrontation. Now, my part of this overall story is to what extent political change in Slovakia, my own country, and the personality of Robert Fico, who is another veteran of the European Council, comes into this. To what extent it can change some center of gravity. What I will try to explain is that Robert Fico, who is the 4th time prime minister, is very much domestically focused, even as we all follow now what's happening on Ukraine before the European Council next week, decisions on opening the accession talks and the financial facility. Robert Fico's main interest is to make changes to the justice and police system in Slovakia. Just yesterday, he introduced sweeping changes to the anti-corruption mechanism, and he's opening a new conflict with the European Commission. After actually elections in Slovakia took place at the end of September, the government was formed at the end of October, so he already had his introduction to the European Council, where he played constructively also on Ukraine. There was some kind of a joint forces of Orban, especially on migration, but he had another secret trip to Brussels to meet with the Commissioner for Justice, Didier Reynaud, which was not reported by him, to actually discuss these changes that scrapped the anti-graft, anti-corruption, special prosecutor's office, and so on and so on. He wants to do it in a fast-track procedure so that Parliament will start debate and vote on it already next week. What does it mean? And I can go into more details of Slovak politics, which I have prepared, but if there is interest during Q&A, let me maybe stay on top and discuss how this comes into the whole dynamics. So, on the 3 key issues on Ukraine that are still on the agenda of the European Council, on the opening of accession talks for Ukraine, Slovakia is not against the Commission's proposal to start, with some small caveats, but I think the whole Commission's proposal to have a political decision to start the accession talks, to open accession talks next week, and then to agree on the negotiating framework in March, when Commission can report back on the on the outstanding conditions. It's fine for Bratislava. Second thing, the financial flows and military support. Again, not a big problem. On the military support from the European Peace Facility, which Orban or Hungary blocks, this tranche of €500 million is also blocking money to be repaid to Slovakia for the military equipment that was donated to Ukraine before. So Hungary is blocking money for Slovakia. And on the big financial facility, there are new conditions from Bratislava ironically, for this government and its past. The track record of the Fico's party. They want to put more conditionality on corruption, and transparency, and also given all discussions after the German budget crisis, they also want to discuss how this money should be devised. But I don't see Fico being part of Orban's confrontation, Orban's push for confrontation. On the EU level, he needs to show his voters that he is against, that he is for peace. He will do it. But behind closed doors in the room, I don't see him going confrontational. His biggest issue now is fiscal stability in Slovakia with continuation of more social transfers. And I think where Slovak story is interesting, more interesting for the EU level is political trends ahead of European Parliament elections. Because it tells us a story in a similar way to what Caroline described from the Netherlands. In Slovakia, it was the left populist Smer party of Robert Fico that opened up to the far right, to the extent that the neo-fascist Republika didn't get to the parliament. In the last weeks of the campaign, it went down from 10% in the polls to 5%, and these voters actually switched to Robert Fico and his Smer party. He swept voters or attracted voters from the fringes by being completely sort of radical in his comeback. Let's not forget that this is a politician who had to resign 5 years ago after mass demonstrations that followed the murder of an investigative journalist, forced him to resign, and that he was on the margins of Slovak politics until he found the ticket to come back. And the ticket to come back was actually to jump on the anti-vax movement cause, on anti-Ukraine or peace platform, anything that could attract new voters, including the far-right voters or non-voters, he used. Now, so this, let me maybe finish with this. So the ruling coalition in Bratislava is made of three parties: Fico's left-wing populist Smer, a smaller center-left party that is led by splinters from Smer, and a far-right nationalist party. But this fourth government of Robert Fico is it has the smallest majority in the parliament, only 4 votes, majority of 4 votes in the 150-seat parliament, and faces the most difficult fiscal and economic position with the highest budget deficit in the Eurozone at the level of projected at 6% of GDP this year. So fiscal consolidation, including social transfer, will be one stream for the government in Bratislava, and keeping sort of fire for the voters under some popular issues and campaign pledges, including no military support for Ukraine, is another one. But how he does it, it's a mixed baggage. He stopped bilateral military support for Ukraine from government or from Ministry of Defense warehouses, but he continues. He allows private industry contracts, and also, for instance, the repair facility for Leopard tanks just across the border from Ukraine continues. Let me leave it at this.
Thank you very much, Milan. But let's go to Caroline for a moment. Maybe I missed it with my technical problems, but Gern Wilders, is there also a change on Dutch Ukraine policy? Or is it more just sort of the Italian model where Giorgia Meloni has surprised us all, or at least myself, with being very pro-Ukraine?
I think this is a very good question, and it's very difficult to answer it, because exactly as Milan is just sketching out, the populists that used to be very clear about what they wanted and what they did not want in Europe, mostly on the right, but also some left-wing populists, they don't want to go out anymore. They have seen that it can be very lonely when when you take your country out. Look at Brexit in a world full of turbulence. So they have all decided to stay in and try to change Europe from the inside. And they, as Milan says, they use, and Geert Wilders does this too. So I said, Nexit is still in his program, but he doesn't mean it. He doesn't mean it. He is, at the same time, he's talking about how to fix migration on a European level. The guy is not serious. What I think was interesting, in the Netherlands, so during the campaign, he said, I don't want all that money going to Ukraine, while it could help Dutch citizens who have housing problems, who have problems with inflation and so on, cost of living. So that was his. He more or less implied he would not be really supporting aid, military or financial, for Ukraine. At the same time, when you look at the polls, he's not crazy either. When you look at the polls, partly also because of the MH17 that was shot down over Ukraine in 2014, the Dutch are very, very pro-Ukrainian. In fact, the level of support among citizens across parties is the highest, one of the highest, not the highest, but one of the highest in Europe. So good luck, Geert Wilders, if you want to stop all that. So I don't believe he wants to stop that. And he has also said on the evening of his election victory that we are fragmented in a fragmented political landscape with lots of small parties. Every party is relatively small. So I need also, like the others, to form a government, a coalition government, and jump over my own shadow. But what elements of his program he wants to put in the fridge, as he also has announced, is unclear. So I think, in a strange way, content matters less. It is the power that they are after, and and Orban shows them the way. As Milan said, Orban shows the populists how, even when you're a very small country, how you can pump yourself up because you're a member of the EU. And because the EU has some unanimity rules, Orban makes himself much more important than he really is. He would otherwise be. And this is, I think, the kind of power they are all after. And I think content, in many respects, matters less. Yes, they want to be strong on migration. Yes, they want to be strong on, they're all very high on the anti-woke horse and against the Green Deal and all that kind of stuff. But if it comes to raw power, I think all these guys and ladies too, they might surprise us in some ways.
Tomasz, very quickly, maybe is the Ukraine policy by the peace government was a sort of topsy-turvy ride. First, very strongly in support of Ukraine, but recently many sort of disagreements, clashes. What's your expectation of the Tusk government? What kind of course will they choose?
So at the basic level, the policy would stay obviously more or less the same, so pro-Ukrainian and so on. But yes, the Tusk government would inherit these problems with the agriculture people and the blockades on the Polish by truck drivers, the Polish-Ukrainian border. So the problem with the economic costs for the Polish population related to the Ukraine. In fact, it will be not so black and white, because paradoxically, there was Tusk's party in the electoral campaign who also endorsed the Polish agriculture association's demands as related to the grain imports in Poland. So he was not. Yes, they were supported or endorsed both by PiS, Kaczyński's party, and Tusk. So I wouldn't expect a very easy solution to these problems. It will be through negotiations and so on and so on. So yes, there is a problem with this blockade by truck drivers and the Polish border. It's quite interesting how Tusk government next week would start to ease to solve this problem, but it will not be by just abandoning the demands of the Polish agriculture and transport branch, especially in the regions neighboring to the Ukraine. So generally pro-Ukraine. As Poland was always, in fact, it is one of the very few points of consensus in Poland with all this polarization. More or less, yes, despite of the rhetoric, it will be the same. This economic problem, I wouldn't expect, in fact, the huge difference as well. So PiS was quite keen to listen to some of this agriculture people demands and complaints about this grain and agriculture trade liberalization with Ukraine, and Tusk will do it as well. So he will try maybe to solve it through some compensations. Yes, the best scenario for him, thanks to some EU money and so on, but it will be quite not so easy for him.
Thank you very much. There's one question in the chat. Maybe we start with Milan addressing this. The question of sort of how this rightward drift we see across Europe, if that is what we see, work with the prospect of a Trump 2.0 scenario. So do you see there an interlinkage, or is it something which happens independently we're looking quite far ahead into the crystal ball. I mean, of course, another Trump presidency is not a given. Milan.
Of course, it's a very interesting question, but I see that at least at two levels. One level is what happens to democratic politics in advanced Western societies. So I would leave the foreign policy level aside now, and I think what we see also in the US is similar to what's happening in some of European countries. Very polarized societies, overlapping crises, large part of our population confused, and leading to these parties that were behind the wall, outcasts, and not only towards them, but as we discussed before, the mainstream sort of shifts towards this type of adopts rhetorics and also sort of embraces some extremist, what used to be extremist rhetorics. So I think we are now living a very difficult period where it pays off if you are a rebel against the establishment, although you are part of establishment. So there is a lot of resentment, a lot of confusion. The mainstream and the center is not good in talking to these confused voters and these people. European Parliament elections will be taking place in June next year. Maybe let me come back to one point what I was trying to say. So the political families on the EU level are trying to already pitch and prepare their campaigns. Fico's Smer party and the smaller Hlas party of Peter Pellegrini, another former prime minister, they were suspended from the Party of European Socialists after they formed the government on the false premise of forming a government with the Nationalist Party, which was always the government partner before. But I think it was part of positioning of the socialist and Democrats and the Party of European Socialists for the election campaign as showing that they are the good ones. You know, they will be running against the center right that is cozying up to the far right, and they need to distance themselves from the bad apples in their own family. But they were completely, quiet when Robert Fico jumped on the anti-vax platform when he was adopting any extremist cause that was around. So the problem is not only in the center right camp. I think it's this lure of populism is a sign of what's happening. As I said, societies that politics is more about symbols and rhetorics, and it's also increasingly sort of we have fragmented politics. So small elections are decided by small numbers. We all have a Trump. There are many other countries with a Trump problem, including country first.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I wanted to bring Caroline in again. In Germany, we see what Milan has been talking about just a moment ago. So the left has split again. We're seeing the foundation of the Wagenknecht party led by Sarah Wagenknecht, a sort of charismatic, originally left-leaning person, also adopting now a sort of anti-migrant and positions. Her big test will come in the European elections in 2024. From what you said earlier, the big discussion here about the center right is the so-called firewall against the AfD. From your earlier remarks, I take it that you would strongly advise to keep this firewall up.
Okay, shall I tell you the story of the Stinktier again? There was in Bavaria. I mean, some of you will of course know the story inside out. In Bavaria, just during and after the refugee crisis in 2015, I was close by. I was living in Vienna at the time. There was a surge in the AfD, and the CSU, and always the biggest party there, was getting worried. So what the CSU did is chase after the AfD, thinking that if they moved a bit to the right, they would get the voters back they had lost to the AfD. But what happened was the contrary. The more they were anti-environmental, they were tough on migration, the more they were doing all these things that the AfD was doing, the more they lost the CSU. So one day, and I will never forget this, I opened the site and I saw, somewhere tucked away on page 17, there was an interview with the then SecGen, I think, of the CSU party. A man called Blume. I think he's a minister now in Bavaria. And the question was, Mr. Blume, why did you stop chasing the AfD? For a few weeks now, you've been talking about women's rights, about diversity, about, the refugees have the right to be treated well, and we have the Geneva Convention and so on. Why? What did you make stop chasing the AfD? And Mr. Blume just explained that they had been bleeding even more votes when they were chasing the AfD. And the AfD was only getting bigger. So he says, we discovered that the more we moved to the right, the more they jumped further to the right. Du kannst ein Stinktier nicht überstinken. And I think this story is incredibly powerful. Precisely what is happening. Look at Spain, for instance. Let's not just be too somber. In Spain, everybody was betting a few weeks ago. When was it? In October. So many things happening. That everybody was predicting that Vox would win, would make big inroads, at the Spanish elections. But it didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? Because the center-right, at the last minute, they had been wobbly, which made Vox rise, very much so. But then the center-right firmly closed the door. Double talk anymore. They said, we will not form a government with Vox. Point final. Vox. I mean, a vote for Vox was a lost vote, so it didn't do so well at all. And of all the foreign press who had flown down to Madrid, they didn't get the front page with that kind of story. But it is a very, very powerful thing, and I'm not saying it's the only thing that happened, but it is a very once they are included in the political ballgame, they play their role and they play it well.
Thank you very much, Henning. Tomasz, you already sort of suggested that it will be not a complete change in Poland. Even Tusk, of course, is a completely different politician from many of the peace leaders. How do you see this sort of Poland moving into 2024 and the European elections? How volatile is the situation? Will we see a sort of peace comeback in the European elections already, or is that episode over for a couple of years? I mean, you already said Andrzej Duda will continue to play a very, very important role for the next couple of years.
So Duda, yes, first he will play the important role as a main player in this cohabitation system with his veto power, but he will be also looking for his role after his term ends. And according to the Polish commentariat, one of his ideas is to replace Kaczyński, or his ambition is to replace Kaczyński as one of the leaders of the Polish, let's call it populist right in the future. Has no charisma to do it, but okay, the ambitions is the other thing. In fact, in Poland, next spring we have the regional elections, and then in June there are European Parliament elections. So as already in this pre-electoral mood will be just in 2 or 3 weeks. And I think, let's remember that peace they got in October the 35% of votes. They are the biggest party. They have no majority in the House, but they are still very strong, and they got 35. I think of votes. I think that 25% of Polish voters, or the people who participate in the vote, it makes the core electorate. It's a mix of nativists, conservatives, and so on and so on. So peace would not disappear and would not become a small party in the foreseeable future. Once it collapses, or perhaps after Kaczyński retires, yes, but still they have the very strong social base. So I think that they will make will get quite good results in the European Parliament elections, but still they lost the dynamic after losing this year elections. So there will be no. So according to the predictors, this governing coalition party, they would get the majority in the European Parliament, but still, I think that the prospect of the strong presence of peace, with a strong support of 30% plus of Polish voters, and the possibility of the return to the power in 4 years cannot be underestimated. They are still there, and yes, they lost one election, but it's not yet. So Tusk government, they will have to be very cautious not to lose elections in 4 years, because Kaczyński is still quite strong.
And if I may, to add something to it, the Polish public media, which were really perched, and the peace loyalists, so pro-Kaczyński's journalists, were filled in on editorial positions, direction, they stay. So I think this is something that Donald Tusk will have to take into consideration when he goes to the European Council next week, and later before the April regional municipal elections, that the criticism of him and framing of him as being, traitor or pro-German will still be there. So I think this will put certain limits to what he can do or offer at the beginning. And also, for me, an interesting question will be this regional dynamics, the attempts to revive a Visegrad cooperation. There is a demand from Robert Fico to have again a prime minister's meeting at the V4 level before the European Council, which didn't take place for more than a year. But you will have an inter-regional dynamic between Viktor Orbán now and Donald Tusk. They are enemies, or they oppose each other. Famously, Donald Tusk, as the president of the EPP, contributed to pushing Fidesz out of the European People's Party. So it will be a mixed picture, and you will have a Polish-Czech tandem of more moderate centrist prime ministers against sort of more populist, radicalized Viktor Orbán and Robert Fico. But I think the biggest player here is Viktor Orbán, because he looks at the European Parliament elections as a turning point where he wants to play a role in somehow uniting these extremist or far-right parties, where he will play with peace, of course, as the leading party in the European reform or conservative camp with Giorgia Meloni. So there will be also some kind of realigning, and then big question after June: what will be the new majority on the EU level that will vote on the new proposed president of the European Commission? Part of the game of Viktor Orbán and his sort of why he now goes into full mode of confrontation is that he wants to kill the second mandate of Ursula von der Leyen. That's for him one of the. He is convinced that she is moving the EU in the direction he doesn't want. Plus the money that are frozen for Hungary. She also played in the role behind that. So the Visegrad will be revived, but also will be deeply divided.
Thank you very much. And maybe for final round, we have only 4 minutes left. There was another question in the chat asking about asking you to elaborate just a little bit on the position of each of the countries sort of represented, or we are talking about where they stand on the very divisive question on sort of the Hamas-Israel war. But I think maybe keep that short. And sort of my final question would be sort of, can we imagine a European Union which is sort of changed from inside, from these sort of populist forces? Is there something which is actually happening, or is actually possible, because it's sort of runs counter against the sort of very idea the way the EU has been set up, or is that really something you can envisage sort of happening over the next couple of years or decades? Caroline first, and then Tomasz, and then Milan for the last.
Okay, I can see it happening. Orbán held a big speech in Zurich last week, 2 weeks ago, on the day that of the Dutch elections, for a very right-wing weekly. And there he told the Swiss, well, I can imagine you don't want to be a member of the European Union, but for us, it has been very good so far, and I believe that the Europe we will have is either my kind of Europe or Macron's kind of Europe. So he sees his playing field in Europe. That's very clear. And I think many heads of state and government have discovered in the past couple of years that, their power in Brussels is increasing. We have more and more Europe, and they stay more and more firmly with their hands against the wheel, on the wheel. It's true that the Commission is more powerful, but the member states have become more powerful too. In how migration is managed, Meloni and Rutte go together with von der Leyen to strike a deal with Tunisia. It wasn't a very successful one, but this is kind of a hybrid EU that we've never really seen before. So yes, I can see it, and they will clash with each other in an incredible way. But when I was in Hungary just before the Slovak elections, Hungarians were telling me that Orban was actually helping Fico coming to power by rerouting refugees. He's always saying that he blocks them, or migrants, whatever, but he doesn't. And he sends them straight into Austria. This time, just to help Fico, he directed them straight into eastern Slovakia, apparently. So that people would be upset. And so, yes, I can see that they help each other and they go against each other.
Thank you very much. We only have a minute left, so let's skip the Israel-Hamas question and go to Tomasz. Also, whether you can imagine a sort of a far-right EU.
I'm more optimistic here. Obviously, we see this impact of far-right populist forces and also the quite common demand among the EU leaders to have this intergovernmental aspect of the EU as a main source of the legitimacy of the EU. But still, yes, Orban is decisively now in more provocative than transactional mood. But at the end, the measure of the impact of the EU decision still, and the economy, and I think that he's very colorful. Megolam, he perhaps started to believe he can build the strong alliance of populists with the real impact of the EU decisions, but I still don't see it as something real in forthcoming 4 or 5 years. I wouldn't overestimate Orban's impact on the EU.
Thank you very much. Milan, just a few seconds left, sorry.
The Israel-Hamas war is not a big issue in Slovakia, in political discourse. The future of the EU also, but I think that what comes after European Parliament elections is these existential questions. The reform of the EU is necessary, more inevitable than ever, but also more impossible than ever. And I think on these fundamental questions, whether the countries and governments need the EU and see their vital interest in having EU, surviving all these crises, including the internal one, this is where you have a real difference, because I have to read all the speeches of Viktor Orban. He is he's dubbing the EU as an empire, another empire that Hungary will survive and his government will survive, and he's for internal weakening of the EU, and sort of he doesn't mind implosion of the EU. Whereas this is where, for instance, other populists like Robert Fico this is against their own interest, against the vital interests of other countries in Europe, also because of the war in Ukraine and Russia in the future.
Thank you very much. Right. On that note, we have to end it today. Please join me in thanking our 3 speakers: Gruyter, Tomasz Tomasz Bielecki. I'm so sorry, and Milan. And apologies also for the technical hiccups. Thank you for staying with us for so long. Have a very good morning and see you next week on the final morning briefing on the European Council. Thank you very much. Bye.